got to do something.
All right, I'm gonna get us going, and everyone can catch up. So good evening. My name is Talia, and I'm the Chief Program Officer here at the Jewish Women's Foundation of the Greater Palm Beaches. JWF's mission is to create long-lasting social change to advance the status of all women and girls in the US and in Israel. Welcome to Money Mavens. It's our monthly series of free financial literacy workshops for women and girls in our community and beyond. This series features women presenters in finance and related fields who guide us on how to take charge of our economic present and future. Thank you to our education program sponsor, Eileen Berman and Jay Bauer. If you want to learn more about JWF and our initiatives, please visit our website, jwfpalmbeach.org, or you can email me. I'll put this information in the chat. I have added the biographies of our esteemed presenters and moderator in the chat. I want to say a special congratulations to JWF board member and moderator of tonight's session, Karen Stevens, for being voted as one of 3 finalists in the 2022 Best of Palm Beach Community Awards as the best divorce attorney. So we're rooting for you, yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our moderator, Karen Stevens.
Yes. Hi, good evening, everybody. We're really glad that you can join us. And for those of you who are going to watch us on the webinar later, we appreciate you joining in and attending and listening to all this valuable, really important information that we're going to share with you tonight. I am surrounded physically on the screen by some really incredible colleagues of mine who I get the pleasure of working with in this marital and family law field on a pretty regular basis, some of them on a daily basis as well. So we have inserted the bios into the chat, like Talia mentioned a few moments ago, but surrounding me is Jessica Tickton, who's a retired circuit court judge from the 15th Judicial Circuit, which is here in Palm Beach County, if you're not familiar. And Jessica now does mediations and special consulting work on the side and was a family law attorney for years before that as well, and is an incredible colleague of ours. We also have Emily Golish, who is my esteemed and talented paralegal who I get to spend every day with and share a wall with, literally, who has been in this field for years and years and years, and is an incredible asset and resource to our clients. And also Allison Creeley, who is a forensic accountant and a CPA and a partner over at Creeley Samoleski, and is one of the invaluable resources that a lot of divorce attorneys and marital and family law attorneys utilize on a daily basis in the cases that we work with to do all sorts of forensic accounting work, tracings and alimony studies and analysis and child support, and you name it. So I'm really honored to be surrounded by these brilliant, talented women. We're going to tonight talk to you a little bit about how marital and family law affects your finances, since this is the Money Mavens workshop. And more often than not, the women that many of us encounter and work with as clients and colleagues in this arena don't understand how their marriage, or even planning before their marriage, does affect their finances during the marriage and after the marriage and in a divorce proceeding. So we're here today to tell you some of the things, valuable assets, knowledge, resource, tips, advice, some funny stories along the way of things that we've seen. And we're going to sort of take you on this journey through the different phases of a relationship life, from before you get married through the possible dissolution of your marriage. So if you have questions as we're going along tonight, you can put them into the chat, and Talia is going to facilitate getting those to us. And we can provide you with links to resources and things like that if you have questions afterwards. So with that being said, we're going to start from the beginning of before the marriage. You're meeting a partner, a spouse to be, and all those sorts of things. And you start thinking about, well, I have a career. My spouse has a career. Maybe we're talking, especially as women, about having children and entering into a marital relationship. And one of the things that lots of people start thinking about leading up to getting involved in an actual marriage is a prenuptial agreement. And that is something that we see a lot, even more regularly and frequently now in this day and age. I will throw this off to my colleagues, but I can say from my perspective, I have seen more premarital agreements coming about in the last 10 to 15 years. I think, from my opinion, people are getting married later they're coming into marriages with assets and careers and, things that belong to them before they're getting married. Folks are getting married in their 30s and 40s now and have careers. So I'm seeing these more regularly, and we can talk a little bit about what they are. But Jessica, Allison?
Oh, well, I'd love to tell you my experience when I was a judge. I loved seeing prenuptial agreements come in when it was time for divorce, because it made it a lot easier most of the time, because the parties had already pretty much sorted things out. And most of the time, there was no problem with it. Everybody understood what was supposed to happen, and it just turned into an agreement, and there wasn't much to fight over. But I will say there are always exceptions, and it's happened. It does still happen where people, even though they've signed a prenuptial agreement, there is still some room for disagreement and fighting or trying to undo it for various reasons. And that's a very expensive endeavor from what I've seen. But sometimes it doesn't matter. It depends on really what the assets are of the marriage. But I guess what I can say is I think the reason for that is at the time when you're signing a prenuptial agreement, nobody knows what the future is going to hold. So maybe what you think is a good idea at the time, it turns out, somebody wins the lottery or something major changes, they want, somehow come into a lot more money later. It doesn't seem as fair in the end. And that's why I think sometimes it turns into a big fight. So it really depends. And I guess my personal advice would be definitely, if you have assets or things that you want to protect, definitely consider a prenuptial agreement. Go consult with an attorney, explore that, but also understand that nobody knows what the future holds. And what might be good for you today when you're signing it 20 years from now may be a very different story.
Exactly. And prenuptial agreements, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, is a legal contract that you're signing prior to you getting married. Typically, they lay out, or they should lay out, all of the assets, all of the liabilities that you have as an individual and your spouse and partner to be that you're intending to marry doing the same thing, and deciding that certain things will remain yours, whereas Florida law, once you're married, might sort of stick those things together and make it a little more difficult to untangle in a divorce proceeding. A prenup, sort of like life insurance, you kind of put it out there and hope you never have to use it, and have it, sign it, and throw it into a drawer, and hopefully never come back to it unless there's a divorce. So Allison, have you seen any? You've worked on prenups from a forensic perspective before, Allison.
Yes. So we've worked on preparing the financial documentation that goes along with a prenuptial, because I think that you can't waive rights. I'm not a lawyer, so if I use lawyerly terms, I just want to throw it out there that I'm not a lawyer. But I don't think that you can waive rights to things that you don't even understand the financial situation of the person that you are going to marry. So I think, just doing the financial disclosure, obviously I look at every prenup through an accountant's eyes, knowing what you have and what the other person has, and knowing what you may potentially be waiving in the future, I think is really important. So just getting those facts down, and we're big fans of too much disclosure, probably because in part we get paid for that, but besides that, I don't think that you can go wrong with trying to be as frank and honest and open as you can be, especially at the beginning of a marriage. So yeah, we help put those things together. The funny thing is that we see that a lot of people do throw them in a drawer and completely forget those provisions until it's time to get divorced. And then somebody goes, hey, you know what? We signed a prenup way back when, and pull it out. So it's important not only to participate, I think it's good for everybody to do prenups. Yeah. Because as Jessica said, you don't know what the future holds, but to visit every once in a while and just refresh your memory, because if as you move forward in your marriage, you say, hey, what we agreed to way back when doesn't fit our circumstances anymore. Mm-hmm. You can always do an amendment, a postnuptial agreement to kind of come back and address some of those things if they don't really fit where you're headed anymore.
And that kind of, when we're talking about this part of your life that's before you're engaging into a marriage and before you're saying I do, a lot of folks, we're kind of focusing on women here today. This is the Money Maven series, but we're talking about women, and a lot of us are coming into marriages with our own careers. And then we start having those conversations about staying home, having children, making those sorts of decisions. That typically is something that affects the woman more generally, because we're the ones bearing the children. But we were talking about this as a group before this evening, and we were saying how important it was to, as women especially, to always work, to have your own career, to have your own, wherewithal financially to support yourself before you enter into a relationship. Long gone are the days of women entering into marriages where they're looking for a spouse to support them fully and are walking in with nothing. More often than not, we're seeing dual income households and things like that. So being able to support yourself, and then to start discussing with your partner prior to the marriage sacrifices and decisions about raising kids. And we talked about that as a panel. And I know, Jessica, you were saying things about, having a deal and knowing what that deal was before you got married and documenting it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's very important, I think, to understand and be involved in the decisions before the marriage and understand what you're looking at, if you can get the full picture. So I think, I know it's a difficult time when you're thinking about getting married. I think that's one of the most difficult things, is to, I guess, bring up that issue. Like, why don't we talk about doing a prenuptial agreement? Because some people feel very strongly against it. Because they say, well, we're not even married yet and you're planning to divorce. So yeah, I get it, but it's just like you said. I think, Karen, you brought up that great point, just like life insurance. Like, nobody likes to think about these terrible things, but it's a smart thing to plan and be prepared for it. So I think that's a good way to address it and say, of course, we're not planning on getting a divorce, but you know what, you never know what happens in life. And, it's one of those things where it's nice to just go through this exercise and never think of it again. And knowing that, we're so secure in our, relationship, that this isn't going to break us. It's just really doing the right thing and getting all the information together. And then also, I mean, you're going into a partnership. That's the way I see it. As a marriage is a partnership. Now you and your partner get to dictate together, what does that partnership look like? Are you going to be doing all of the paying the bills, or none of it? And I think it's a good time before you get married to start thinking about those things and establishing that, because sometimes people don't even join, you don't join bank accounts usually when you're just dating. It's when you're getting married, that's when that sort of thing happens. But how many people have two, I call them the, not like the bookkeeper of the relationship. So, that's just the way I refer to it in my mind, because usually in a relationship, you have one person who's responsible for paying the cable bill or the phone bills and all the bills, really, and the other person is comfortable knowing that stuff is getting done, which is great. Personally, I like to do that. And, that's my personal advice to all of you as well, is be active in your financial situation, volunteer to do the bills, to be the bookkeeper. And if you're good at that sort of thing, obviously, if you're the kind that's going to miss payments and drop the ball there, then, maybe that's not the best decision. But the point is, you and your partner should discuss these things and work together in that way. And even if you aren't going to be the bookkeeper in your relationship, I think it's really a wise decision to still be involved and still show participation, be active in it, and know what those bills look like. I can tell you a little side story too. I used to see so many cases by the time they came to trial. And it's scary when you realize for the first time, you wake up and you haven't been involved in the finances during the marriage. And maybe if you haven't been involved, you could see this scenario where you are accustomed to a certain lifestyle and you see all these great things. You have a beautiful house, you have expensive cars, your kids are in private school. But if you're not involved, you're not paying the bills. I always hated seeing somebody for the first time realize we have nothing. We have a whole bunch of debt. All of these things that I thought, we had a whole lot of money because we can afford all these wonderful, expensive, luxurious things. They're all financed and there's nothing there. So, and that's heartbreaking for anybody to realize, especially in the middle of a divorce, which is a very difficult situation. So to go for from the beginning. I think before you can get married is the best time to start getting involved and start getting familiar and have a plan for how are you going to be involved and how are you going to keep this information handy and stay involved. Never like, bury your head in the sand.
Yeah, I think that that's really important, is even if you're not doing a prenup before you get married, know what you're walking in with and know what your spouse is walking in with. Don't start off with your spouse to be has $800,000 in student loans you didn't know about, and the monthly payment is thousands of dollars. You need to know these things walking in, or your spouse is indebted up to his or her eyeballs and credit card debt and things like that. And like Jessica was saying, seeing it in front of her in a courtroom for the first time is a horrible situation. And I know Allison, and especially, in Emily as well, who's dealing with the documents day to day. Can you guys tell us some of the things we're going to try and transition into, like during the marriage? So what are some tips? What are some things that you have seen, Allison, when folks come into your office and are going through finances with you during a divorce?
Well, I think exactly what Jessica said, right? It's, first of all, it's heartbreaking to see people come in and think their financial situation is one thing when in fact it's something else. And obviously when it's worse, when the financial situation is worse, it's really a tough conversation to have. People will say, well, I've got this big house, right? I have these nice cars. Our kids go to great schools. And it's like, yeah, do you realize that your husband's only been, and I say husband, I apologize. So, but do you realize that your spouse has been paying the interest only option on the mortgage? I mean, that was certainly a problem a couple of years ago, but I think we're going to start seeing it again, where people kind of take on a little too much house and are not making the full payment, or their house is in foreclosure or in some stage of foreclosure. They have no idea that credit card bills are out of control because their day-to-day life hasn't changed, right? And that's really quite heartbreaking. And also too, even on the flip side, I had a client once who thought her husband made about $100,000 a year. He made like $700,000 a year. So meanwhile, she had scrimped and saved. That was kind of good because there were marital assets, but he had, used some of that $700,000 or extra $600,000 to, take women on trips to California. And he just had, like, he was spending like it was going out of style. And I think because she just didn't know the whole piece, she thought that she had to live very frugally. And he was out actually spending all this kind of like crazy money. And it took her a while to get her head around. Now, it was kind of in a good way, but in a bad way, because she had lived most of her marriage in what she felt was somewhat dire circumstances. And that was really unfortunate. And I think it really had a psychological impact on her, a negative psychological impact, right? She just always felt a little under the gun. So it's best to just know where you're at, and that way you can share it with with Emily and with you, share that situation a little more honestly up front, because sometimes I like when people come in and they say, my husband makes X, I make Y, we have a house. Okay, can you tell me what my settlement's going to be? And I'm like, well, that's assuming that anything you just told me is true, and it's not because people are attempting to mislead. It's because they really don't have the entire picture. So my answer is always no. I can't tell you what you're likely to receive. But it's the better knowledge you come in to meet with you, Karen, and you, Emily, and the better off the process will go from day one.
Yep.
I think.
I think that that's an important thing when you're talking about while you're in the marriage, is to be alert, to be aware of what is going on. If you take anything away from us tonight, it's to pay attention. You just heard from Allison from a forensic accounting perspective, how these folks come into offices and don't understand what's going on or what anyone's making. You should know what is going on. You should know where your money is being spent. You should know where your spouse is spending or what he or she is investing in, what businesses they're starting, and ask those questions and be that kind of partner who's involved in this relationship. And I know oftentimes when you're in the middle of a divorce, that should not be the first time you're learning these things. But we do have mandatory financial disclosure that happens in a divorce, which is usually when Emily and other folks who are paralegals and accountants are getting involved looking at these documents. And Emily can share with you some of the experiences that she's had literally walking through clients how to log in and download a bank statement. So any war stories, Emily, of some of the experiences you've had with working in the trenches with these folks?
Yeah, I find there's a lot of people that don't know how to access basic things like online banking. A lot of people don't know what accounts exist. You know, I agree it's very important to be open and to be comfortable asking questions. You know, what do we have? What do we pay? And, you know, sometimes they just don't know. And, you know, when you have to pull up accounts and see that there's other things in there, well, hey, here's this other account. Hey, here's this bill we didn't know about. And you really have to kind of dig through because they didn't know, because they weren't paying attention.
And know those online logins, you know where your money is. Are you guys a Bank of America family? Are you a Charles Schwab family? Like, you need to know what's going on.
If it's a joint account, you should have access. You should know how to access it. You should know what's going on.
Just because, again, Karen, we talked about it earlier, or last week when we spoke, which is you never know what's going to happen, right? And this idea that, well, even forgetting about divorce for a moment, I mean, that's what we're all here talking about, but it's the old, what if your spouse is hit by a bus, right? I mean, I know that people don't really get hit by buses very often in South Florida, so maybe that's a terrible example.
Bullet
Right.
train.
Bright line.
Yes, the bright line. Yes, every 3 days. So suppose they're in a hurry and trying to go around the gates at the bright line, and get hit. You need to know the same information to deal with insurance companies to live your life after an event like that, after a shocking event. So I think that as much as a divorce is a life-changing event, sometimes, I mean, obviously death is a life-changing event. It's important to know. I know that sometimes women, I think, have a tendency not to want to appear pushy, or to, and sometimes it's not even not wanting to appear pushy. It's, do I seem like I don't trust my spouse? Or does it seem like I'm just a money grubber? Or, there's a whole bunch of, I think, complicated feelings that come with discussing money. But those are important to get over, as my mom would say, just get over it. And really force yourself out of your comfort zone if you have to have these conversations. The first one's tough. The second one's usually a lot easier. And then from then on, it becomes a habit to kind of touch base on things.
And we talked about this too. A lot of maybe a way to start that conversation is just with something as basic and simple as, how was your day? Tell me about it. Because then, if you show interest, then, I think your spouse will be a lot more open to telling you about things. You'll get a better understanding of who's working with your spouse and what kind of transactions are they doing. And, if you're showing interest, then your spouse is going to be more likely, I think, to share information with you, even if you're not getting like everything right away. But stay interested, stay a part of it, because it is for your own protection. You absolutely want to have all that information. Especially, one thing before I forget is this day and age with things like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of value to that, and it's difficult to understand, but not just difficult to understand. It's pretty much impossible to find and to take any value from it if you don't know about it. So, have these conversations with your spouse. Like, what do you think of cryptocurrency? Should we invest in some of that? And sometimes it's okay if your spouse says, oh yeah, I bought a whole bunch of it. I have it. You're like, oh, cool. So, how does that work? Try to be involved and find out how it works and what happens. And, they have these little things, because we've probably all heard stories by now about people who bought Bitcoin and forgot it was on their computer, and, you replace your computer or you throw it away, and you just threw away potentially millions of dollars. Well, that could happen too. And not to make light of it, things happen in life. If your spouse passes away and there's an untimely event, something happens, a tragedy, and you didn't know about that, or you don't know how to access it, it's gone. It's gone. So, these are the things to jot down and have these discussions, and they don't have to be difficult, like nosy discussions. If you're making it a part of your daily ritual to say, how was your day? What happened at work? And, just showing interest, I think.
Show an interest, be part of the team.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think something we hear a lot when we're working with clients, especially going through a situation or a separation or divorce, is that, well, my name's not on that. That's his name. He's got that, or that's in her name. I don't have to worry about that. And I'm going to blow everybody's mind who doesn't know family and divorce law in Florida right now, but it doesn't matter. Once you get married in the state of Florida, anything that you're doing with your spouse or without your spouse, with their name on it or not, is all considered to be part of this marital pot of money and investments and things that happen. And I know that I will have clients constantly say, oh, well, the house is in both names, but the mortgage is in his name, as if that's somehow going to be this creative way that now, oh, okay, I don't have to pay the mortgage. So it doesn't exactly work like that, folks. And that is a huge pitfall. And I see folks that don't have prenuptial agreements, and I'm sure Jessica saw this from a bench perspective and in mediation all the time, is folks are like, oh, okay, well, that's in my spouse's name, so we don't have to deal with that. But you actually really need to. So title does not matter in the state of Florida. If it happened during your marriage, since you said I do, until somebody files for divorce, it's happening, title or not. And we have to unpack that. So all those bad decisions that your spouse might be making, that you're thinking, oh, he took out the HELOC, that's on him on the house. It's not exactly how it works.
And retirement plans, actually retirement plans are one of my favorite, because people will say, well, my spouse told me that his retirement plan is his and it can't be divided. And I'm like, well, that's not true, right? But that's the one I hear a lot. And some of these retirement plans, and I'm talking about like, especially things like firefighters and police officers, but not just them. Even some companies still have really quite lucrative retirement benefits. People don't know they exist, don't have a lot of documentation on them, and worse yet, or sometimes I had a client who they were fighting over a house. The house was worth at that time about $220,000, right? Locked in this intense battle over the house. The husband had a retirement plan that was worth $1.7 million. And even the attorney didn't think it was a big deal. And I'm like, don't look here, look over here. There's this huge number and with huge value to the wife in this case. And the husband had convinced her, and even the attorney was not a practicing family attorney, also thought, well, it's his retirement that he earned during the marriage, but somehow that she wasn't entitled to an equitable distribution, if not a quadro out of it. And it was stunning, right? Because the numbers were so big, and people sometimes look at tiny little things and they like to fight over tiny little things. And there are big things over here. So the retirement plan one is the one that always sort of gets me. You hear it a lot.
That and like the paychecks. So, especially when only one person is maybe earning income, and there's this big idea, I see it frequently, because people are just like really hesitant to let go of that's mine. The paycheck is in my name. I'm the only one paying the taxes on it. So that's mine. And I'm not going to share that. And it's kind of difficult to get that across, that actually during the marriage, what you earned, even though it's in your name alone, that's marital, unless you have a prenup that says otherwise. But we're talking about just in general without a prenup now, and that's hard for people to grasp that. Or on the flip side, all the credit card debt that was run up during the marriage. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people are upset to find that out too, and say, I didn't buy all these things. That was my spouse spending on this or that, and we have a whole lot of debt. I'm not paying any of that because that's not mine. I didn't buy those things. If it happened during the marriage, that's marital debt.
Coming back to the stay aware and pay attention, mantra here, which is really important. Sometimes we see folks that say, oh, well, that was my premarital something, whether it was an account or a house or something like that. That was my premarital thing. I owned that before, so that's still mine. And the problem is, without a prenuptial agreement or some other kind of marital document before you get married, it starts to get very gray once you get married when you're dealing with something you might have had before. So when folks say, oh, well, that house was mine before, and then you start to drill down on things with them and say to them, well, what did you do to that house while you were married? Did you guys put on a new roof? Did you put in a pool? Oh, and you find out they demoed the whole house. It's down to a shell and studs, and they've rebuilt this whole house while they were married. And this wife or husband who walked into this relationship with this home is sitting in our offices or in front of a court saying, well, it's still mine. And that's not exactly how the law works in Florida. In fact, it's not how the law works in Florida. And we have issues with parties and clients not understanding that. And as women, when you're getting married, if you have something that belonged to you before, without a prenuptial agreement, if you take that asset and you enhance it or increase it or update it or do something to it, and it doesn't have to just be real property. It could be something as simple as having that retirement account that Allison was talking about. You had one because you worked for the school district for years before you married. Then you get married and you keep on putting into that retirement account at the school district. You've got a problem because now you've got a mix of years of service before you married your spouse and years of service after you married your spouse. And it is not a clean way to really untangle what we love to call commingled and assets that become messy. So being aware of what's going on, separating things out. You know, I see folks that without a prenup, sometimes when they get married, start a brand new retirement account. It was like a clean line, a clean division, things like that. But Allison, Jessica, have you seen situations where you've got this commingled mess of things?
All the time. I'm sure Allison sees it a lot more often than I do, but I see it all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. And we work with respect to retirement plans, we can extract it out, right? I've done it a bunch of times in cases. It's work. It's a lot of work depending on the length of the marriage, but we can take those post-filing contributions and the earnings associated with them. I had a client that didn't realize that in the beginning when we were talking that he had a premarital retirement account that he had in fact put into a rollover IRA, and it was about worth maybe $58,000. Well, the value of those assets now is $900,000. So that turned out to be really actually good work that we did on carving it out, right? But it is hard work. But with commingled bank accounts, you have, right, there's one theory, and it depends on the attorney and certainly the amount. And I'm talking about cases that settle, not that have made it all the way to Judge Tickton at that point, but you have sometimes somebody will have a non-marital account and they'll put their paycheck into it after the marriage. And it's like, okay, well, if you've done it more than a couple of times, it loses its character. And I don't want to make opinions, but there are cases that sometimes there is a one-time commingling and, maybe I used the account and I deposited a check in it and I immediately took it out. It's a little cleaner and easier to explain, but it's sort of like, it's to me, a premarital account is like white paint and marital monies is like red paint. And the minute you start putting that red paint and you put a couple of drops in or more couple of drops, then very quickly, you don't have white paint anymore. You have pink paint and you're never going to be able to separate it out. And it's going to lose its non-marital character. It's kind of facts and circumstances dependent, but I've seen some attorneys take a very hard line and say, 2 deposits over 20 years, I consider that to be marital. Now we're going to fight it out in the court, right?
And it could be, it very well could be, it's really going to be up to, everything is, so fact specific. It really depends on exactly what's going on in your case, but I think it would be up to the judge who's going to look at that. And the judge would ultimately decide if there's a way that you could determine a certain amount. But the problem is when it's sitting in an account, and being mixed together for years. And I think maybe some of these things happen for that same reason that I said, is somebody might misunderstand and think, well, it's my paycheck from my job. It's got my name on that paycheck. So I'm going to put it into that account that I've had since I was 20 years old. Well, now that you're married, that paycheck, it's marital, even though it's just got your name on it. So if you're putting that into your non-marital account, you're just playing with that money, it's growing, it's shrinking. I don't, when I was a judge, I would look at those and say, I have no way of knowing which dollar was from before you got married and which dollar was from after. And I can't possibly separate it out at this point in a situation like that. Now, Allison, you're exactly right. If it was like a one-time, oh, I just sold the house and I put the proceeds into this account, and just for a second while we opened a new account and then I moved it over there, then the judge might be able to look at that and say, yeah, you know what, this was just for like, it was a drop for a second and I'm just going to take that whole amount because that's what's right. But that's a scary thought, to think that people don't realize that what they're doing because of something so simple as, well, it was in my name, the paycheck's in my name. And I've seen that happen dozens, if not hundreds of times.
Yeah. And we had a question about, we're talking about doing a prenup and then maybe people choose not to, and now they're setting in a marriage, maybe currently, or looking at their situation going, oh my God, I just did everything that those panelists said was wrong. We had a question about, is there recourse? Is there something you can do to unmuddy the waters while you're now married?
Right, isn't that a post now? You can make those decisions now, even if things are sort of muddied up, and say, hey, remember how I had that account? And just in case something happens in the future, I think you can still have those conversations, and you can still designate things as, well, yes, I commingled it. But your spouse says, yeah, of course it's your money. Why don't we just designate that account now, and we'll make an agreement that says that no matter what happens, that account is going to be considered a non-marital account from here on out. I would think that, and I don't know how many Jessica saw, I've seen a couple of postnups. Usually they end up turning into marital settlement agreements, but that you can go ahead and rectify some of that stuff as long as both parties are in agreement.
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely. And of course, that depends on your relationship and, the status of it and, what's going on. Because if it didn't work out to get a prenup, I could see it being just as difficult to bring that conversation up again, because are you bringing up, that old wound where it's like, what, now you're trying to divorce me? Are you planning something? And it's a difficult conversation. So, we don't want to make you think like, oh, this is just easy, just get it done. But, if it's something that you were talking about, maybe there is a way to try to bring that up again in a nice, loving way, saying, you know what, we really dropped the ball on that. It would be nice. I have no plans on divorcing. I don't want to do that, but just to make sure we have everything straight. Remember, we had discussed doing this before. And something I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about before the marriage, but it could also be during the marriage when you're having discussions with your spouse as far as family planning. This is something that comes up a lot, where maybe you're going to be the one who's going to, if you're going to raise the children and stay home and stop working. It's one of those things, like, even if you don't get a postnuptial agreement, it's great if you have an agreement, like that kind of arrangement. If you have something in writing, even if it's just text messages that you can kind of save and make sure they don't disappear or delete after a year or whatever it is. Keep those around, where if you're making arrangements with your spouse, that this is the understanding, especially if your spouse is telling you, I don't want you to work. I want you to stay home and take care of the children, or just stay home and, be a housewife. We have tons of money. You shouldn't be working. Some husbands have said this, it's an embarrassment to me when you're working and it's like saying, I'm not earning enough money. I've heard these stories before. Well, just remember, when you if you do end up in a divorce situation and you go in front of a judge, it's going to be your word against the spouse's word at the end of the day, if you don't have something in writing. And it's a lot harder for a judge to determine what's really true when you have one spouse saying, oh, he told me I shouldn't work. He not only told me I don't have to work, he discouraged me. He told me to stop working, and I haven't worked now for 10 or 15 years. And, it's going to be really hard for me to just step it back into the job market and find a great job. Well, I supported the family, and now he's earning a lot more money. When his testimony is going to be, no, I wanted her to work. I told her every day, stop being so lazy, go get a job. That's kind of tough, but it's easier if you have even some text messages back and forth, because your text message with your spouse, I'm sure. You're going to have this conversation. Maybe it's in an email, text message, whatever you can get. If you can't get a postnuptial agreement where it's clear that that was a decision and agreement that you made together and that there was a reason for it, if you have one.
Absolutely. Documentation is, in this world, it's becoming almost easier because there's so many means in which to communicate now, whether it's a text message or whatnot. Save those important conversations. We have a lot of stay-at-home dads now and house husbands, and it's not just a female-dominated situation anymore like it was maybe 30 years ago. So if you make a concerted and joint decision with your spouse that he or she is going to be the one that stays home, you better have that, sadly, documented in some way, like Jessica's saying, because I can guarantee you when they're sitting on a stand and in front of a judge, they're going to forget that conversation that you had 15 years ago, because, oftentimes the person that you marry, like you hear, is not the one you're divorcing. And you see a very different side of that person later on. We had also a question about future inheritances and whether they can be included in prenuptial or postnuptial agreements. So under Florida law, any inheritance that you're getting from your family is typically and generally non-marital to you. What you do with that funds after you receive it is where we see all of the problems. So if you take that money and you park it somewhere over here and you don't really do much with it, fine. But when you get that inheritance from your deceased grandmother that you just found out about, and all of a sudden it passes into your joint bank account that you and your husband use to pay all your bills, or you and your wife use to pay all your bills, now you got a problem, because like Allison was talking about, that paint situation with the red and the white and it becoming pink, money coming in and being used and this and that. You've got to consider that once you're taking that inheritance that you're receiving from a source and putting it into something that belongs to both of you from your marriage, you're sort of giving it over to your marital relationship at that point. So you can certainly include inheritances in prenuptial agreements, in postnuptial agreements, and you can define that even if money from those inheritance is utilized for marital sources or something, or to upgrade something on the house, and then you pay that inheritance back later on or something like that, you can cover that in a prenup or in a postnup and say that that money still remains the person who received its money, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, Karen, most of the prenups that we've done lately have been the children of wealthy people, right? And so the parents insist upon this prenup, and a lot of our disclosure is about the family more so than the parties, right? The parties are young, maybe they don't have that much, but we spend quite a bit of time talking about, hey, here's mom and dad's money. We just did a prenup for somebody, and their parents are worth about just this shy of $1 billion. So, right, that is eye-catching. But the family very much has a philosophy about the money. They were very insistent that a prenup be done. And there was a lot of language in that prenup about the exact situation you said, is what happens when inherited monies come in. They are never to be considered part of the marital pot. And here's how we're going to carve them back in the event of a divorce later on. Maybe there's a provision to pay the spouse some money based on how long the marriage might be. But it's a lot of times prenups are about protecting, at least traditionally had been about protecting parents. Now it's more about protecting the parties, but every once in a while we still get one of those big parent kind of cases.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with a divorce case, we are talking about how there's some mandatory disclosure that comes about in every single case that's triggered. There's also financial affidavits, which for some folks is a very exciting adventure for them to be working on for the first time in their life. And usually that's something that more often than not, paralegals and accountants are dealing with, sometimes the attorneys. But Emily in my office is always the person, if we don't have someone like Allison helping us on a case, is working down in on the grind with us with the client, going through an affidavit. So can you explain a little bit what a financial affidavit is, Emily, and some of the things that you see when you're working with these clients and some of the comments that you hear, and it just is shocking.
Yes, it's a very big pain in the butt project where you have to determine every little monthly expense, and also all of your assets, all of your liabilities. And it's very difficult to determine how much you pay on every little category of expense. And it's a long form.
Emily, do you find that when you're doing these, you pick a time frame to look at these average expenses? Because even like utility bills, right? If we look at 3 months now, it would be very different than 3
About a
months.
year.
Like in the summer, you try to do a full year.
I'll usually average out a year, yeah.
Mhm.
But then
Yeah.
you have certain expenses that are not yearly, like vehicle maintenance, things like that. So
Mhm.
I remind them that, you do have expenses that you pay every few years, so make sure to reflect that and just get your average cost.
Yeah.
And the financial affidavit is not really, to me, it's a living document throughout the divorce case, and you may update it and change it as you need to reflect new information.
Sure.
But it's a kind of a tough little document to get through because, okay, I spent $2,000 on Amazon last year. Is that household? Is that it can be clothing, it can be personal care items, it can be sadly for me, meals away from the house because I eat terrible food. So it can be a whole bunch of things. Just sussing out to try to figure out what these expenses are really for can be kind of challenging as well.
Some people are embarrassed about what they spend on certain things, and you have to tell them, don't cut yourself short. You get haircuts, you take vacations, you need to take care of yourself, and you're entitled to that.
And along with the not cutting short, some of them have absolutely zero idea what it costs. Anything. When you start looking at clients and they're like, oh, we have a really nice house. It's like 4,000 square feet and so on and so forth. And you're like, what's your mortgage payment? I don't know. And you're like, do you have a mortgage on the house? I don't know. And it all goes back into the staying informed and being alert in your marriage, but they have no idea. And Emily will spend hours with clients going through and looking at bills and analyzing, how much it costs to run a household. Folks have unreasonable, both either they're way over or they're way under. It's very rare that a client is spot on unless they're like in some sort of financial analyst or banking field. They're very rarely on it. But they have no idea. And we talked about that earlier. They don't know what their spouse makes. They don't know what the income of the household is. They don't know how much their property taxes are, or if their taxes are escrowed into their payment, in the mortgage, or what a HELOC is. And it's just mind blowing how many mortgages you have on your home. How much do you spend out of the house every month eating out? And so we do typically look at a year of expenses, especially if you are a party who is seeking alimony in a case. It is very important that your needs and your financial picture is on this document for court. So again, being aware and paying attention is important.
Especially, I'm sorry, Karen. So I would just want to kind of hone in on one thing real quick, which is income taxes, right? The number of people I speak to who have never seen their tax return. Back in the old day, it was like, I never signed this. That's his handwriting, right? And now it's like, I never saw it because it's all electronically filed. And yes, they will forge the signature to the CPA who goes ahead and files a tax return electronically. There is a lot of information in the tax return. It doesn't necessarily mean that's how much you make, right? Because taxes are kind of like a weird animal unto themselves, but just if you're not seeing the tax return, you need to hoop and holler, right? First, are taxes even being paid? Because I have a lot of clients that when we get into the divorce, hey, they haven't paid taxes in 5 years. So now you've got to go ahead and file 5 years worth of tax returns. And that means a huge hunk of assets are likely going to go out the door to pay those taxes. So, that's one of those things I would just really stress. Hey, I need, let's walk me through the tax return, right? Yep. Which sounds so boring. And I'm an accountant and I think it's really boring. I mean, I really do. It is.
But news alert, you have to file taxes every year, which is always something that mystifies me, is when they come in here and we say, we need your last 3 years of tax returns. If they even know where that is, that's awesome. But going backwards, they go, God, I can't remember the last time we filed taxes. And I'm like, these people exist. They're amongst us in the world. They haven't filed taxes in 6-7 years. And now you're dealing with it.
And oftentimes it turns out they're my clients, right? So for whatever, I'm like, yeah, you're not going to get away with that. And the judge, depending on the judge, and I'm not going to step on Judge Ticton's response on this, but there are some judges who will just pick up the phone and alert the IRS that taxes have not been filed. So you've got some real serious issues, which makes it then a little bit more difficult to go to court because you haven't filed those tax returns and somebody's going to want those returns filed. So that's like one of those fundamental pieces of paper. And I'm sorry, when we were talking about a bunch of other things, I think that that's an easy one to ask for, and it's once a year, and it's really important to make sure you're filing your taxes.
And as an accountant, Allison, although you may not be preparing taxes, but folks who are CPAs doing this, if they're doing a joint tax return, that accountant should be and must talk to both parties if that other party reaches out for information. So,
yes, they should.
Yep.
So they're not always cooperative, but absolutely positively, if somebody is preparing your joint return, you have the right to ask them. You have the right to call them up. You are the client as well, although they may have a relationship with your spouse. Absolutely, they should pick up the phone and talk to you about your return. Unfortunately, in reality, a lot of them don't. But you can also go online and get copies of your tax return, but the IRS's website, I'm going to say right now, is a little bit broken. But there are ways to get your tax information if your spouse has not provided that to you, but best to get it from your spouse, I think.
Yeah. So I think that kind of is a good transition into talking about, you're considering separation, you're looking at a divorce being imminent here, and some of the things that we could suggest to you as just tips and words of advice from our perspective. But going back to knowing all of this information and being alert and being aware in your marriage, and now you're contemplating this possibility of divorce and separation. My number one suggestion to folks out there is to start making copies of documents. So piggybacking off of this tax return issue, start downloading bank statements and start making copies of tax returns that are in the office, or, a lot of spouses have home offices, they have all their documentation sitting there. I'm not suggesting to go in and be, Magnum PI and a spy here, but start digging through and paying attention. Like, do you see an account, something that says Charles Schwab on it? Do you see something that says, Bank of America on it? And start paying attention to where things might be and taking pictures. Cell phones are readily available to everybody these days to start taking pictures of things, start scanning. You can scan with iPhones and with Androids. There's a way to do that with your phone. If you don't know how, it's a good thing to Google. Start scanning stuff, start making copies, taking pictures, and pay attention to what documents are laying around the house is very important. So, but also along that same, mindset is start looking at what's in your home as well. I've had clients who, they know that when they're going to tell their spouse that they want a divorce or have filed for divorce, that oftentimes spouses can, there's situations where folks are violent or start locking people out of homes or doing things that they cannot be doing, but do, and start just damaging things and destroying things. So I've had clients over the years, videotaping and panning a room with their cellular phones and documenting artwork that you might have in your house, or jewelry appraisals that have been done for your insurance, and having access to those things and paying attention to where those are. If you're thinking about divorce.
Personal objects too with sentimental value.
Yeah.
People like to damage out of spite.
Yeah. Sometimes it's less of a financial thing and more of just the emotional toll that we can, people take on. If you have family heirlooms and things like that, to start paying attention and, safeguarding them, or, documenting where they are and taking pictures and things like that. If something's irreplaceable, moving it away to your mom's house or your sister or your friend's house and things like that. Safeguard assets. You just don't know sometimes what one's reaction to this new change in your life might be. But any other tips from you, Jessica, when folks might be in this idea thinking that there might be divorce?
Yeah, I do just want to say too, because when we start talking about this, nobody would ever want to get married when we start talking about all these terrible things. And we don't wish that anyone that's considering getting married end up in this situation. Hopefully, when we're telling you and saying, look, be aware, be involved in your finances, that doesn't mean that it's only for the reasons that you might end up getting divorced or your spouse will predecease you. It's really, really important that you are aware of your finances to protect yourself and your family. And hopefully you'll never get a divorce. But the things that Karen is talking about, these are this is the information that if you do end up in a situation where you have to think about getting a divorce, when you go and you meet with your attorney for the first time, your attorney is going to want to know all this information and is going to ask you to get it pretty quickly if you are going to take that step. So that's why this is the information to know. These are the things you are going to have to get, because once you file a case, once you start a divorce, or if your spouse files for divorce, these are the things that are required, that you've heard of probably a few times throughout the hour: mandatory disclosure, the documents, the financial affidavit, all of the documents that you have, the bank statements, the tax returns. If you have businesses between you and your spouse, those things, credit card statements, life insurance policies, these are all standard things. You're going to need to get it. So if it's imminent and it's coming, and you want to make sure that those things don't evaporate, once your spouse finds out that you've spoken to a divorce attorney, it's a very good practice to get your ducks in a row. Just get everything together. You're not stealing information. You're not doing it. I mean, obviously there are some things I think we should warn. If you are starting a divorce situation, you should never go opening your spouse's mail. You should never go digging in your spouse's email and reading those things, unless they've given you the password, and that's a different situation. But still be very, very careful, because we do see bad things happen when people are reading emails between your spouse and the lawyer, which is a very, very bad thing, causes a lot of problems, and is a very expensive problem when you start litigating. So we're not suggesting that. That's what I think you meant by being a spy. Don't cross the line, but things that should be, open and discussed, and it's information. If you haven't been able to get all of that throughout a nice sharing, happy marriage, like we are hoping you will have, openly sharing all this financial information, then yeah, definitely do everything you can to secure it before it disappears. We've all seen that happen. Information starts to disappear once a spouse is angry and you're in a divorce situation. So that makes a lot of sense.
Also to get, I know it's like a little off topic, but to get your own email that is secure. So don't use the same password you've used 100 times before. Get a new account with a new fresh password to use to communicate with your professionals, because there is that I think temptation when people know their spouse's email account, that you don't want somebody to just be tempted to snoop in your stuff while you're attempting to communicate. And I think people forget sort of those basics, right? Of be careful when you text message, especially if you have an iPhone, right? And everything gets shared, because I know that my boyfriend says, hey, did you answer your sister when she texted you today? I was like, hold on. Oh, that's right. Because he's using the iPad to do the New York Times crossword puzzle, and my messages are popping up, right? So just simple things like, being aware of how your communications sync up, and using a little bit of email hygiene, I think, is probably a good thing.
That's awesome point. And we see that all the time, even though it's a little off the financial topic, it very much is important, especially with those iMessages.
We've seen it expose extramarital affairs.
Yes.
You start getting text messages from your spouses.
Apple Watch.
The Apple Watch.
The Apple Watch.
Yeah.
Yes, Emily and I have had cases where the Apple Watch has been the blow up of the situation, and pictures coming through on all the devices. So
Be careful with your technology.
yes. Yes, but definitely setting up a clean email to start over. And, I've seen emails that are like, Karen's new beginning at AOL.com and stupid stuff like that. I mean, whatever you need to do. But I do think that that's important. But also if you are starting, trust your instincts, especially if you've been with your spouse for a long time, start to notice changes and things. You know better than anyone when you've lived with this person for years, if spending is suddenly increased. Sometimes, all of a sudden there's lots of big financial decisions being made in a hurry or a rush, and you're being told to sign off on things quickly, and start questioning those things. If you see, your spouse suddenly like dropping shifts or taking a lot of extra time off work, or, those sorts of bizarre changes of behavior, as much as we hate to think that people divorce plan, people set themselves up. Your 57-year-old wife or husband who's suddenly saying, I think I'm just going to retire early. And you're like, oh, that sounds great. We can now travel the world. And then, 3 weeks later, you're getting a divorce filing served on you. So start paying attention to those sorts of things, and different changes of lifestyle and income. So along with that is the actual like divorce process, which we've talked about sporadically throughout this panel here tonight. But divorce is a very it's a very often lengthy process through the court system. Everybody, especially in Palm Beach County, before you can go into the court for really any kind of relief or request for anything, you have to go to mediation. Every client, if I think that if all of us had a dollar for every single time a client comes in and says, this is going to be amicable, I would not be working still at this point in my career, because we hear that all the time. And oftentimes that is an anomaly and cases are amicable, but it just seems to be that that is often not the case. And you start to see people at their worst in these situations. But to know your rights, to get yourself proper counsel, to understand, and we can talk a little bit about that. We talked about what happens during the marriage and the money that you make, and it doesn't matter whose name is on it. We have very specific statutes here in Florida that talk about what is marital property, marital assets, marital income, and what is not, and what is non-marital or premarital. And to know your rights in those in that arena of what you're entitled to. And we've talked about the retirement accounts, we've talked about income, we've talked about pensions and names being on things, but to understand what is marital versus non-marital. So, Allison, Jessica, if you guys want to add anything to better explain that, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think from my perspective, yes. And I don't know what online resource would be available to, if people really aren't at the point of talking to an attorney yet to understand what property is non-marital, but those, when we talk about things like those inheritances and like those accounts, financial accounts, investment accounts that were held prior to the marriage and have not been commingled, that paint issue. But there may be other types of accounts. I'm trying to think right off the top of my head of financial accounts that would be, and I can't really think of any, but you mentioned also real estate, right? And obviously trusts, right? They're like inheritances. They are generally non-marital. I can't think, Jessica, you might have more thoughts on that, but those are the ones that I can kind of quickly think of too.
Like we talked about the inheritances and the, trusts, absolutely, I mean, unless you do something and real property, unless you do something to change that during the marriage. So like, your house that you owned before your marriage is your house before marriage. But as Karen discussed earlier, certain, if you're making improvements and you're using marital money to do that, and all the money that you're, paying the mortgage down with marital money, that can be separated out and considered marital. But if you do something as simple as just slapping your spouse's name on that house during the marriage, then, that was your house from before marriage, and congratulations, you just made it marital. Now, there's always exceptions and arguments that people can raise and say, well, I did that, we only did that for tax reasons or something. If that's the case, maybe you have a shot at still keeping it as premarital or non-marital, but But, in general, it's important, I mean, I don't think we have enough time to go through all of the little distinctions, but the general rule is the things that you owned prior to your marriage are non-marital. You can always make them into marital things if you're not careful, so be careful. But it could be anything from before your marriage is your non-marital. The date of your marriage, that's the idea, is everything that you get from the date of your marriage, except for like inheritances or trusts that are specifically for you. If it's during your marriage and you received it using marital efforts, or if you incurred debt during your marriage, it's marital. That's a general rule. And like I said, there's always exceptions that can be argued.
Yep. And a lot of times we have folks that come in and talk to us about how long their marriage has been, and I'm going to need alimony and things like that. Alimony is very specific in Florida. We have different kinds of alimony. Just because you've been married a long time or you stayed home for a period of time doesn't mean you're automatically getting alimony. It doesn't mean that you're automatically getting alimony for the rest of your life. And make sure that you're getting appropriate counsel and talking to someone about this, because I think this will kind of lead us into some of the topics we want to end with and some of the fun things, or funny things, I should say, that we see in our practice. But the fact that people love to have, I call them beauty parlor discussions, and they sit down to get their hair colored and they're talking to the lady next to them and the girl on this side of them, who've all been divorced, of course, and everybody, had a different lawyer in a situation, and they start talking. And this one's telling this one, oh, I got this because, and we were only married 5 years. And I hate those discussions, because that person that's in the middle chair at the salon is the one that comes back to your office on Monday and says, well, I met these two ladies and she told me she was married 5 years and her husband's paying like $10,000 a month in alimony for the rest of her life. And folks always think that they can compare their situation to the one that they talk to at the hair salon or nail salon next to them. And that's not always the case. And alimony is very specific. And there are a lot of statutory factors in Florida that a judge has to go through when determining if a spouse, first of all, needs it. And then second of all, just because you need it doesn't mean that your spouse can pay it. So it's a two-sided equation that the court has to do a real detailed analysis of before determining if it's going to be awarded, and then how much it's going to be, and then how long it's going to be. We have short-term, we have, long-term marriages, we have moderate length marriages, and there is no alimony calculator in the state of Florida. So a lot of times people think, oh, well, if I've been married X years, can't you just put it into the computer and tell me what my alimony is going to be? The answer is no. And in fact, there's been lots of bills and laws over the years to try to do exactly that and have an alimony calculator. But because there are so many factors that come into making that decision on whether someone's going to get it, need it, and what it's going to be, it's not a one size fits all. So it's very hard to have a calculator. So, but yeah, those salon conversations are always my favorite. Jessica Allison,
as the wife, you could still pay the alimony if you're able and the other one needs.
That's right. We've had a couple of, I told the story, right? I had my first big case was an attorney who had to pay alimony to her husband. And boy, hell hath no fury. Every time we have these cases, and we do have them, they're still not the norm, but we do have them. There is it's a real difficult conversation to have with clients, and to get them into that headspace of understanding that you could be, that's right, absolutely, you could be the payor. If your spouse stops working, doesn't go back to work for some period of time, or is taking care of the children, or whatever facts and circumstances, I think it's easy to forget that women are not always the recipients, but can be the payors.
Yep. We are definitely, not only do women often and sometimes more often nowadays are paying the alimony in situations, but I think, and Emily, from your perspective, since a lot of times you're the initial contact with clients when they call in and they're wanting to set a consult with an attorney, I know that you get some wonderful questions, but share with share with this group, what are some of the questions that you get when clients call in for the first time wanting to set a consult? Your favorite ones.
I can't really think of any. I don't
Um,
know. I mean, they do ask a lot of blind questions, where we would need a lot of information to answer.
Yeah.
I really can't think of any specific.
Like, how about how much is this going to cost?
always.
Oh, yeah.
Always,
okay.
right?
All right.
That's like the
Yeah.
first question. It's like, okay, well, I'm meeting with you, right? How much is this going to cost? And I
How long
always
is it
say,
going to take?
Yes.
like, are you, if I could figure that out, I wouldn't be doing this for a job, right? I mean, I'd be in Las Vegas all the time.
Yep. How much
Cost-
is this going to take? How long is it going to take? And can Miss Stevens, or insert the attorney's name, can they tell me at the consult what I'm going to get? Like what I'm going to get? Like what am I going to walk away with? That's my favorite. So they'll hit up the first line of defense at most law offices and ask those questions. And then they come in for the consult, and clients are always wanting to know how much it is going to cost.
And oftentimes, Karen, it doesn't have to do with how much they make or how much they have in assets. I mean, you can have a case where people have a lot of money, a lot of assets, and you're just like, oh, this is going to be a good case for us, right? And it settles right away because there really weren't any complicated, certain facts and circumstances to deal with. But then you can also have a case where there is not a lot of assets.
They like to argue.
But yet people are very argumentative and litigious, and things are oddly complicated, and nobody is providing the information they need to provide. And those are the difficult cases, really, because fees ratchet up because of somebody's behavior, usually along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We got a question from somebody who had said that they had seen, and these are my favorite, those signs on the side of the road that are like $250 for a divorce and call the number. So if you've ever actually probably are not geeky like us who've looked at that to try to figure out what's going on, be aware a lot of those signs. First of all, there's most attorneys that we work with in this community, divorces are never flat rate, simply because of what we just explained to you all, which is it's hard to predict and what people might spend money on, and what they might have they're not fighting over. And I oftentimes see that the most expensive divorces don't involve assets and alimony, they involve children, and where they're going to spend the holiday break and who's going to have decision making are oftentimes the most excessively litigated and expensive cases. So there's typically not flat fee divorces that I am familiar with, but a lot of those signs that you see on the side of the road for like $250 and all are usually form preparation folks who sell you forms that shockingly enough you can download offline for free through the state of Florida. So if you Google Florida Supreme Court family law forms, you can download and access fillable PDFs and Word documents for a lot of standard templates that oftentimes those folks are selling for $250 through those divorce things. So be aware of what you're getting. They're not providing you with counsel or representation. They'll help you prepare forms and then give them to you to file.
And only a lawyer can give legal advice.
Yes.
Period.
Right.
Yes.
But, yeah. I think there was a question too about whether you can do it without attorneys, or if there are other ways of doing it that are not as expensive, if it's not as contentious. Now, I know we've discussed that too, that everybody thinks their case is going to be easy. This is a simple case. Everything's going to be short and easy. That's every call because everybody wants it to be that way, and it doesn't work out that way for everyone. But of course, there are those cases. And when I was a judge, I saw plenty of people come in representing themselves without attorneys. But it really, it's like there's no way to know until you try it, I guess, and see if if you have a lot of assets and businesses are involved and a lot of complicated issues. People usually find that they don't understand enough on their own because it's very complicated. So they usually end up going to attorneys. But, of course, if there's so many different scenarios. If you've gone to attorneys to get a prenup done before your marriage and sorted everything out, and there's nothing to fight over, and you're just saying, look, it's all here. There's no ambiguities. Everybody agrees on what this means. Great. Maybe it really is simple. It's definitely possible.
Yep. I agree. Some cases can absolutely be done without attorneys. I will say to you that a lot of times some of our practice is not the initial divorce actions. In fact, a lot of our practices are not the initial divorce actions. They are modifications or enforcements of settlements that were made years ago or months ago. And Not always, but sometimes those problems occur because no one looked over what was being done and signed off on. So oftentimes, it's always like you have to be conscious of the deal that you're getting. Meaning like if you get 3 estimates to clean the roof on your house and you pick the cheapest one, you might get the guy who doesn't have the license and the insurance to be doing the roof cleaning, right? So a lot of times you're dealing with attorneys or you decide to do this on your own, you're not sure what you're doing and you think you've done everything right, but you haven't. And those are the problems that end up in our offices and in front of judges and in mediations years later, because things weren't contemplated correctly or weren't done correctly. So we're not here to say that every case needs an attorney, because it's absolutely not the case, but understand that I don't know how to fix my car and I stay in my lane and do what I do, just like I don't try to, be a dentist or a doctor. We all know what we know. And so you're not good at everything. And when I need help, I reach out to somebody who knows those things. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, because a lot of what we see are the problems that occurred from not doing it correctly the first time.
There's also, I don't know, everyone in our audience, but there are different ways. So you can hire attorneys to handle it in a different way. So, there is a collaborative process, and anytime you go and you consult with an attorney when you're considering divorce, the attorney would explain to you all the options and see what's right for you. But yeah, there are definitely ways where you can hire an attorney and say, listen, even if it is a complicated thing, the collaborative process would involve hiring neutral professionals from the get-go before you even filed for divorce, to try to resolve it before you even file a petition to divorce. So in theory, that idea is to try to resolve it all with the attorneys, with having your professionals, with your legal advice, and everybody being aware of what's going on and handling those complicated little issues, but not fighting it out in a terrible way. It's a lot more peaceful. Of course, it's expensive anytime you're going to be dealing with that stuff, but sometimes, a lot of people who've gone through that have said it's a lot less expensive than filing the petition and fighting it out in a bitter divorce litigation. So, I mean, it just depends though. I mean, it really depends on each family.
When we were meeting as a panel before tonight and talking about some of the fun stories and things that we see in our practice, one of the other fun sort of scenarios that we often see is usually women who come in and say, well, I automatically get the house because I have kids. And we're here to tell you that's not exactly how this works. And it is not how it works automatically. But along with like my salon beauty parlor discussions that I was sharing with you, that is one that we hear a lot is, well, I have kids, so I get to stay in the house at least, right? Because that's how it works. And that is not how it works. And in fact, we have an insane housing market going on right now out there. Our houses are ridiculously priced and are selling into hot seconds before they're even on the market. And something 10 years ago, 5 years ago in cases, oftentimes the houses were the biggest problem because, somebody wanted it, but there wasn't enough money to buy the other spouse out of it. You've got to deal with this. It's an asset. You don't automatically get it in a divorce just because there's children. Nowadays, houses are so inflated that it's becoming an unpriceable market for a lot of our clients to be able to buy the other party out of the houses. So people are staying in like business partnerships, owning houses, and divorces that I've never seen before in other crazy situations. But no, you don't automatically get the house just because you have children. Any other crazy scenarios we can end with, Jessica, Allison, Emily, that you've seen in your practice?
How about the don't I get half of his income?
Yeah.
That's a little bit of an older one, but yet it still is like a thing, right? Where people think that they're entitled to half of their spouse's income. And I guess like the idea that that they are going to get it for the rest of their lives, even if it's not a long-term marriage, but even if it is a long-term marriage, right? Permanent alimony is anything other than permanent, right? And just like people understanding, yeah, when you're 85, chances are you are not going to still be collecting alimony. I mean, it happens from time to time, but it's a little bit of a rare occurrence.
Yep. So I think we have answered all of the questions that have come our way tonight, and I think we'll sort of end it there. Obviously, we're not all sitting here as attorneys, and not all of us are attorneys here giving you legal advice. But if you're in a situation or you have questions, definitely reach out to an attorney and get advice on the situation. There's also, if you need forms and things like that, I've said that you can Google Florida Supreme Court family law forums and download a lot of basic templates if you need help. There's also self-help centers at all 3 of the courthouses here in Palm Beach County who cannot provide legal advice, but can assist you with doing a lot of the same things that you see those roadside signs advertising for that we were talking about. So we really want to thank you all who have attended live tonight and all those who are going to watch this on the YouTube platform later. And on behalf of JWF and the board and all of these fabulous panelists, Emily, Jessica, and Allison, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we wish you happy, healthy financial security and being alert in your relationships if you've taken anything away from us tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.